It's all happened here. Everything we've ever known, done, loved, took place on this drifting, spinning ball that's our home. It's where we learned to provide, nurture, protect, thrive. And yet,
wildfires are scorching the West Coast, leaving behind a path of death and destruction.
15 inches of rain this morning.
The waters keep rising, and according to the National Weather Service,
our very success now threatens our future. Today, our greatest challenge is to learn how to grow while sustaining what sustains us. Your understanding, your science, your work are the solution. You have the power to see patterns and relationships and show us how everything and everyone are connected. You have the power to transform how we produce and consume, build and maintain, unite and strengthen, heal and nurture. You can help us see that we can no longer live apart from nature, but must live as part of it. Today, geography matters more than ever. The geographic approach, your work, and the billions of maps you make are essential for creating a more sustainable future.
Good morning. My name is Jack Dangerman, and I want to welcome all of you back to the day 2 of the Esri International Users Conference. This has been an amazing conference so far, with dozens and dozens of technical sessions where people are sharing their work, learning sessions, and we're making progress. Listen, today we're going to be sharing from 4 amazing speakers their experiences and also their vision and also their practical work of how we can create a more sustainable planet. The first of these is Paul Salopek, who is actually walking around the world experiencing firsthand with people on the ground what it's like to confront in various situations in various countries the changes that are occurring on our planet with climate change, with changes in migration, and we'll hear his experiences. He's coming to us from China. So, Paul, you want to take it away?
Hello, my name is Paul Salopek, and I'm the person walking around the world with the Out of Eden Walk project. It's a great joy to be among you here at the annual Esri conference to talk a little bit about what it's like to transect the world today in the age of the Anthropocene by foot at about 30 inches astride, or about 3 miles an hour or 5 kilometers an hour. So let me talk to you a little bit about what I'm seeing and what I can share as we all walk collectively, because that's the way I think of my project, that we're all walking together into a challenging 21st century. I titled my walk, the Out of Eden Walk, using the term Eden in an intentionally vague way. I mean, if you're a person of faith, I respect that. If you're an anthropologist, I respect that as well. But in the context of my project, I am talking archaeologically and paleoanthropologically about the human birthplace, the cradle of humankind, the mother continent of Africa, that we all spread out of. Somebody back in our past, in our collective family trees, walked out of many, many thousands of years ago. My project is about art and science And it's using the medium of walking to connect both. So back in January of 2013, I walked out of the Rift Valley of Africa with the idea of rewalking the original dispersal of ancient humans across the world, all the way from the mother continent to the very tippity tip of South America, which scientists tell us is one of the last horizons that our ancestors laid eyes on. This is a journey of about 24,000 miles, a journey of upwards of 70 million footsteps, a journey that will take 14 or 15 years of my life. And it's been an absolute delight and revelation and a humbling experience to be able to do this. I'm now in year 8. I'm talking to you from Shanghai, China, where I am preparing to launch the walk across this vast and complex and diverse country from the southwest to the northeast. China alone will take me about 18 months to walk across, and the kilometers here are about 6,000. It's going to be a remarkable once-in-a-lifetime journey, couched within an even bigger once-in-a-lifetime journey for me. And I'd like to invite you all along as map makers, as people who are thinking about how we again move together into a sustainable future, right? The theme of sustainability comes up organically on my walk again and again without me even trying to think about it. It's very concrete. It's not an abstraction. How do we survive together as we inch into an unknown future that is looking very uncertain? Think about the bottlenecks that we all face in the coming century, whether it's climate change, whether it's conflict, whether it's these vast income inequalities that span not just communities, but continents. Think about the mass migrations that all of these factors trigger, pushing people away from violence or poverty and pulling them towards a more peaceful and economically just horizon ahead. I have walked through all of these headlines. I've walked through all of these stories. And the idea of the walk is not just to slow myself down. This is an experiment, a global experiment in slow journalism, but to see how all of these massive topics and issues are connected. Because I believed as a foreign correspondent that I was moving too quickly in the past, and that I would get the story, wherever the story was, whether it was point A or point B, but not only was I missing out on the entire alphabet of stories in between by flying over them, but even more importantly, I wasn't seeing how every story in the world is connected to another story. How an economic story is connected to a political story. How an education story might be connected to climate change or to conflict. If you pull hard enough on any story that you hear, whether you see it on the TV news or you hear it over a beer with your friend, that story is connected to another story, that it is self-connected to another story, all the way over the horizon. And the Out of Eden Walk has been this amazing vehicle for me personally, and I hope for my readers and my audience, of just showing how interconnected all of these stories and all of us who inhabit these stories really are. So I titled my talk, A Walk Through the Anthropocene, because now more than ever, in a digital age when we've kind of melded into a global hive mind through this amazing technology that I'm using to talk to all of you, our fates are more interconnected than ever. Let me just give you some examples and some lessons about how we might be able to think about moving through the Anthropocene, the human-made age, the age of humanity altering nature more than ever before, and how we may, hopefully by learning from each other, navigate through major questions of sustainability as we go through our lives into the new century, into a new millennium. I was thinking and preparing for this talk that what have I learned at boot level from the ordinary people that I meet along the way? What lessons have I picked up after walking, what is it now? Gosh, it's 11,000 miles. What is that, more than 22,000 kilometers, I think. It's 8,000 days and nights plus of moving across the world. The things that I've learned happen in very small packages, in the package of an individual human story, one person that I meet. The first people that I walked with walking out of Africa, to give one example, are the Afar pastoralists. They're camel herders who move their animals up and down the Rift Valley of Africa. And watching them navigate that part of the world, which is undergoing enormous climate change right now, fickle rains are getting more unpredictable, pasture land is shriveling up, water holes are drying out. Their entire way of being, this pastoral economy of movement, of moving animals across an unreliable landscape, is becoming increasingly untenable and pushing them into cities like never before. So a whole way of life is thinning out and vanishing. What they taught me when I walked with these folks who would walk 25, 30 kilometers a day across a very arid landscape in northern Ethiopia is they were always alert. They're alert like a hunter is alert. Even when they're walking, their head is swiveling around, constantly scanning the horizons for clouds, because wherever there are clouds, there's likely to be cloudbursts and rainfall. And by the time you walk to that cloud shadow, the beginnings of grass will be coming up for your animals. I watched how they walked physically with their bodies. They barely lifted their feet, just almost seemed like a micron off the desert surface. And they had this kind of low-slung shuffle that I, in my imagination, think is kind of an eternal walk, a walk that will keep them going despite narrowing resources far into the future. So that's one example of learning from the people that I met along the way about methodologies, cultures, even the physicality of getting through thinning resources that are getting scarcer and scarcer. Learning by example, person to person. I walked with these folks for about 400 kilometers until I reached the Gulf of Aden. And then I took a camel ship to the Levant, to the Middle East, and walked through the Middle East, through Saudi Arabia into Jordan. And there was another example, another community of people that I learned from about how to survive in extremis, how to survive in tight straits. In this community were the 600,000 plus Syrian refugees taking refuge in the country of Jordan, many of them living in refugee camps, others hiring their muscles out as farm laborers for just a few dollars a day to pick tomatoes. And what I learned from that community about the day and age that we live in is how sharing and compassion is vital to our communal survival. These folks had almost nothing. I would walk into their communities, I would walk through agricultural fields and see their tents, and invariably they would invite me in to share whatever they had. Often it was just a cup of tea, or maybe a pile of freshly picked tomatoes. And I remember them joking with me, saying, we wish we had chicken to offer you. We dream about chicken, but all we eat is tomatoes. We have fresh tomatoes, we have pickled tomatoes, we have boiled tomatoes. Welcome to our world. But I have never experienced in my life anything like those weeks where I walked among people who had almost nothing and they shared everything with me. And that was such a soul-feeding experience that I'll always carry with me as another example of what walking across the world has taught me about getting through our age of uncertainty, getting through this brand new era called the Anthropocene. Share what you have. Help the other. Another example, a little further along, after walking through the Middle East and across the Caucasus, would be Central Asia. I spent 2.5 years walking across the old Silk Roads of Central Asia, walking across Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and then over the Karakoram Mountains into Pakistan. What I learned going across those bronze-colored steppes was yet another lesson in mobility, right? A lesson in the power of movement as a survival mechanism in hard times, and not just as refugees, not just as pastoral nomads, but the power of movement of ideas. Because as I did my research, as I did my homework about my stories about the Silk Road, what began to dawn on me as I walked through these formerly glorious cities like Khiva, Bukhara, Samarkand, is that they thrived not only because they controlled trade routes to the the main commodity that's come down to us, which is silk. But they were crossroads of ideas that made their societies blossom and bloom during medieval times, and they became global centers of culture and learning that far eclipsed the levels of learning in places like Europe at the time. They were the hotspot for universities, for astronomy, for arts, for technologies, everything from paper to tempered steel, passed through these societies where ideas were exchanged, and it was the actual potpourri, the mix of ideas that made them great and made them shine, and effectively ignited the golden age of Islamic learning. What happened later provided a lesson to me as I inched out of that landscape, because all of those cities and all of those places now are either preserved as archaeological sites or are rubble. I walked through for 2.5 years the rubble of the Silk Road, because not only were they bypassed in trade routes, but they experienced an inward turn late in the 10th century, where they no longer were as receptive to outside ideas or outside people. And at that point began the decline. So that was another lesson, again, about how we're going to get by in a world that is increasingly polarized, a world that sometimes feels like it's getting more and more xenophobic, where walls are going up, paradoxically, instead of coming down in an age of globalism. The final example I can offer and share about this long stroll across continents that might be a hint at how we can try to navigate the Anthropocene and all the issues of sustainability that comes with it, about using increasingly smaller shares of resources, would be India. So I spent 17 months walking across northern India, almost 4,000 kilometers. And India, as some of you might know, was one of the early adopters of the Green Revolution technologies that allowed us to feed our global family. Genetically modified foods, high-yield crops, the use of fossil fuels to pump groundwater to drastically and radically increase yields. All of this was great back in the 60s and 70s, right? But what's happened, the after effect, the hangover of the Green Revolution in India was one of the most sobering environmental stories that I've walked through in my entire career. It's certainly the most daunting one on this long foot journey. India is now going through the most serious water crisis of any country in the world. They are not just running out of water in which to drink and to grow their foods and to stoke their industries, but water quality is now highly compromised by pesticides, by chemicals. 600 million people in India are affected by this crisis, either water shortages or water quality issues. Up to 200,000 people a year are dying because of the water crisis in India. It is so big of a problem that it almost feeds denial. It's too big of an issue, too big of a tragedy to get your head around. And I walked through it for almost 1.5 years. What are the solutions? Nobody really seems to have a handle on it yet. I don't know where India is going to go with its water woes. The government has been proposing massive terraforming schemes like river linking, joining massive rivers together to basically reshape the hydrology of an entire subcontinent. But what stood out for me, again as an example, at boot level, face-to-face, eye-to-eye with Indian farmers, were the measures being taken by local communities to be more sustainable with the resources that they had, and smarter. Smaller, but smarter. They were digging tens of thousands of small wells, surface wells, to capture surface water, rainfall. They were adapting old crops that were better adapted to drought conditions to feed themselves, reaching back into human memory for examples of ancient technologies that are going to serve us well as we move into the new century. So what I want to just say is that the walk has been like a necklace of beads, and every bead is a human story. And there have been tens of thousands of them that I've encountered with a hello along the trail, or spending a week with one family, or spending months in one town. But the beads that I leave you with from my trail, we can rub our fingers as we walk together like prayer beads going forward, is look for rain, like the nomads of Ethiopia, and share what you have, like the refugees of Syria, and tear down the walls around your communities to share the ideas and ideals of openness of the Great Silk Road, and go back into memory to mine the wisdom of the ancients to help us see our way through things like the water crisis of India. We are an amazing problem-solving species. We've got lots of problems, most of them created by ourselves, and we have to resolve them. But our ancestors, the one who walked across the earth back in the Pleistocene, those hunters and gatherers that I'm following from campfire to campfire, they were master problem solvers. They problem solve their ways across unknown landscapes. We've got to continue using those muscles. And I've got to think that we will. I am so delighted to share this with you. And I've been working with Esri almost from the very beginning to map this journey, and look forward to continuing ahead. There's still a long way to go. All of China, all of Siberia, all of the Americas. So hope to be seeing you out on the trail.
Well, I want to thank Paul for this amazing story, walking around the world. Can you just imagine what that's like, bottom up, experiencing firsthand real experiences in the communities that he shared? I want to now move on to our next speaker, who is Lejeune Montgomery Tabaran. And she is the CEO of an amazing organization called the Kellogg Foundation, WKKF. And she's going to share some of the work that she's doing in thinking through and applying geographic thinking and ultimately GIS to the issues of racial equity in the communities that we are all living in here in the US, but also around the world. So welcome, Lejeune. I appreciate this opportunity to be with you. And as you know, maybe firsthand, I have a real connection with the organization that you run, the Kellogg Foundation. And Mr. Kellogg, well, most people have had a relationship with Mr. Kellogg because they eat Kellogg cornflakes or Rice Krispies or these sort of things. But for me, I got acquainted with them because I went to a school, Cal Poly in Pomona, which was founded by Mr. Kellogg with a certain focus on community and looking at people that would not have gotten into normal universities. That was me. And it was sympathetic, and they brought me in and they nurtured me and taught me education in a different way. He used to call it learn by doing. And so it's ingrained in my soul, this idea of learn by doing. But so we became acquainted recently through a amazing coincidence. But I'm doing all the talking here. Lejeune, why don't you introduce yourself and let's get started.
Well, thank you, Jack. And it is a pleasure to be with you again. And as you mentioned, when we spoke originally and learned that the impact of Mr. Kellogg is very much a part of your journey as well as it is mine, it gave me goosebumps at the time because, you know, we do this work every day and we meet so many people. But when you hear the stories of his impact and the fact that we're all on a journey to make the world a better place is just something that connects us so intimately. And it's just been a pleasure partnering with you and the work that we are going to continue to do together.
You know, we have lots of shared belief, and I guess we're talking here to all of our colleagues around the world who are GIS people. The foundation that you run, why don't you share some of the things that really are the core things that Mr. Kellogg set up that, for me, just inspire me every time I hear them.
At the beginning, Mr. Kellogg made a statement and he said, I'll invest my money in people. And what we'll find is that he understood that people create the conditions. And he gave us as a North Star to create a place where all children can thrive. And we know that that happens when people create the conditions for children to thrive. And our work has been all about looking at how children and then their parents, and then communities are places of equal opportunity so that all children, through their families and their ability to provide for themselves, is nourished and grown in every community around the world. And that's really our work. What we've learned over 90 years of doing this work is that in order to make sure that all children thrive, you must look at issues of racial equity, community engagement, and leadership. We call those three elements our DNA. And we know that these are at the root of creating thriving communities where all children can have opportunities. And that has been our work. And this partnership allows us to continue our efforts in this journey, looking at, through the lens of the SDGs, how we can make sure that every community all over the nation and the world creates those opportunities for children to thrive.
I happen to know personally that a lot of your priority has been, especially in recent years, on dealing with racial equity. And I'd really like you, for everybody listening, to define exactly the idea and the theory that you are creating that supports that.
We believe that racial equity is about two things. One is about beliefs. And what we want people to believe is that everyone has an opportunity to thrive regardless of their physical color or characteristics. So racial equity is about believing that we are all human beings, we all have value, and we all deserve opportunities to thrive. The second part of our racial equity work is looking at the systems and structures that create racial inequity and changing those systems so that they produce equitable outcomes. And you do have to admit that the systems have been created by people, and that those systems could, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, have a bias that affords some opportunities and not others. And in our racial equity journey, we just want to look at both the beliefs and the systems and ask the same people that work in these systems to pause and think about whether it's something that they can do to change the system so that they're more equitable.
Yeah, I like
that's the journey.
That's the journey. Being able to characterize racial equity as an outcome of systems that may build in biases or may build in different kinds of issues is really a wonderful way to see it. So in some ways, geography enables the idea of seeing systems and then being able to overlay these systems and see some of the interrelationships. You know, what was the result of redlining and how that affected this or that? These sort of things are some of the issues that our users are playing with, but I really enjoy and appreciate your perspective on this.
What I would say is the tools that you provide us through the GIS applications actually allow us to illuminate the current impact of the system and to determine what path forward might change the outcome. So for example, during COVID, right, we have seen the maps that show here is where COVID exists. And you can see patterns forming of where the surges were. But we can also use your data and the tools to disaggregate even further into understanding the patterns that are forming in those systems as they exist today. So when you disaggregate the data and you start to see, as we did, that people of color we're getting more we're having more complications as it related to COVID. We're even maybe dying more than others. That allowed us to understand what are the systems that are producing these outcomes. And we learned more people of color were more of the essential workers who could not stay inside of their home and quarantine. they had to continue to work, and therefore they were exposed by greater measures and impacted more greatly. We needed more information and to understand those systems more fully, to understand how to help keep them safe. And that's work that is happening. And I think that's a perfect example of what our alliance is going to provide for these countries so that they can take better measures to improve the outcomes.
Last year, Stefan Swinefest actually shared with us the work that he's doing at the UN and how we are supporting him in building a kind of SDG framework for being able to monitor and hopefully manage the world to a better place. One of those particular issues, one of the particular SDGs that he has organized, which is SDG 10, which is all about racial equity and equity in general around the world, which is the topic of this particular effort that we're doing with Kellogg Foundation.
Thank you. And yes, I agree. This will be amazing. And the work will be work that will take us forward in many significant ways. But this partnership between the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, our grantee, the Public Foundation, Esri, and the United Nations, a very formidable partnership, and we're calling it the SDG Data Alliance. This alliance will enable 20 countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we know everyone is working on the goals, but many countries face very practical and technological barriers, and it prevents them from their full participation in working toward the goals. So the grant will build the information technology capacity and infrastructure to allow these countries to monitor and report their efforts towards achieving the goals. And they're going to do this through what we are calling the grant and using our DNA lens to do this work.
Yeah, it's like you were saying. I mean, Esri has great technology, and we can provide technology grants to the different countries, and we've been doing that in test cases around the world. But I like your phrase of DNA. You're providing the DNA, the actual substance of what will make these systems come alive, because it's not just technology. It's actually got to be the people, the investments in people. And particularly, I like your philosophy. I mean, why I was so attracted in the first place is your philosophy of building communities. Can you maybe talk about your sense of communities and how they, and of course, Mr. Kellogg's vision initially?
It was his vision. He created the entire foundation. And again, as I mentioned, he knew that people had the inherent capacity to improve their own lives. And so he wanted people to work on creating these conditions for children. And so what we have been doing at the Kellogg Foundation is lifting up people through Mr. Kellogg's theory of change. We call it his theory of change. He said that if you bring people together and promote cooperative planning and infuse that planning with intelligent study and support their group action, sustainable change will occur. We call it the formula: cooperative planning, intelligent study, and group action. This partnership is about the intelligent study. Of course, people have data, but we need the right data. We need data that's been informed by people in the community that actually experience the disparity or the issues that we're working on. We need to bring them to the table, and we need to have data that's been informed by everyone at the table. And what we know, we've seen the evidence that when people create the solutions, they sustain the solutions.
Yes.
When it's a bottom-up approach, you're more likely to have sustainable change over time. What doesn't work is when change is forced or mandated from up above. And what you find is the community is not invested in that solution, and it goes away very quickly.
Yes.
So if you really want sustainable change, it's the process of engagement that leads to that, bringing people into the conversation who are impacted, who will give you a perspective that those who are not impacted will never know.
Lejeune, what are you doing for local communities here in the US and also around the world?
Yes, Jack, we envision a space where we can inspire and activate change makers around solutions in many communities throughout the nation and the world. And the way we see that happening is through what we call a community action hub. And we see these community action hubs bringing community together and fostering collective understanding. They will visualize their data on maps of how the solutions for the issues that they're working on. And then we will equip the community with all these available tools to solve these problems. And what we believe is it will lead to action, and communities will collectively drive agendas that will change the outcomes for people in their community. And we've actually been working on a demonstration of this. And we are working in a partnership with the Southern Communities Initiative. The Southern Communities Initiative is a coalition of corporate funders and foundations working to strengthen racial equity across the South. And they're doing this by pooling funds and developing a long-term plan of action. And they're going to focus on Atlanta, Birmingham, Memphis, Houston, New Orleans, and Charlotte. These are all communities with very stark racial disparities. And we'd like to show you a demonstration of how these tools can align their work and bring about racial equity in these Southern communities.
A community action hub is more than a website. It's a place where ideas can change minds and activate individuals to develop solutions. We use the geography of New Orleans to show this idea, since both the city and the region are part of the Southern Communities Initiative. We also know that many community-based organizations are actively working together for an equitable New Orleans. The people in these communities are change makers. They're connecting businesses to capital. They're creating jobs. They're growing food. They're mentoring youth. And you're doing all this with GIS. When you launch a community action hub, you can invite the change makers to lead the conversation. They're already doing great work. Bring them in for a greater collective impact. These 4 pillars represent initiatives a city may want to address. Let's look at wealth creation. Data in the form of maps helps us foster collective understanding for better and more equitable communities. An initiative within a hub brings those maps together. A simple population map like this allows us to visualize the people of color by census tract. We can further our understanding around indicators like income by race. We might also use the data to understand the kinds of resources available or not available to communities, like access to vehicles. This information is important to understand how far community members need to travel to access healthy food or jobs. And ultimately, the data might present opportunities to take action. This map reflects the Job Proximity Index, where jobs are accessible to the surrounding community. These data points can indicate where there is room for investing in education, business, and job creation. An initiative can equip the community with solutions to create action. These solutions can take the form of apps that help the community find, support, and contract with local businesses owned by people of color, or in surveys that can connect businesses with potential job applicants. Dashboards can be used to track the economic status and advancement toward racial equity. They can guide leaders, banks, and community development financial institutions to opportunities for local investment. This is just an example for what a community action hub could be. But imagine the potential of bringing multiple communities in a region together, linked as change makers. This particular hub of hubs represents the work of the Kellogg Foundation's partner, the Southern Communities Initiative. It is a place to share best practices, pull together data, and connect across communities, leading to widespread impact. The Southern Community Initiative identified 4 racial equity pillars enabled by digital access and physical infrastructure. Community action hubs can show how we can map opportunities for progress. Now, many of you have gone from open data to hub for citizen engagement. We believe that this model can expand racial equity for greater action in your community.
That was just an amazing demonstration. And as I understand it, you're working on making this into a template so that our users who are working with hubs in their respective countries and cities can actually apply that template again and again to really bring this to scale, transform communities around the world into this idea of engaging individuals and around issues that they themselves really care about.
What we hope to have happen from this demonstration is that the GIS community will help us to realize this vision. We have the tools. The tools are available. We want the GIS community to stand up these community action hubs all over the nation. We want them to help us join change makers together and lead in this conversation. And understand that this is a moment where we can take the best GIS tools and infuse it with a racial equity lens that will make significant progress toward achieving the kind of equality that we envision for the nation and the world.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, this is serious business. These footprints that the Kellogg Foundation is putting down, working with their different collaborators, are going to show the way for us to create a better world. And Lejeune, let me again say thank you so much, not only for this partnership, but also for the sharing that you've done about your vision and how you really see making the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a partnership that we will nurture into the future, and definitely around the aligned purpose of building a better world for tomorrow.
Our next speaker, Dr. Enrique Sala, is with the National Geographic Society. He's actually an explorer in residence. And the National Geographic Society is taking on a very bold vision of working on something called pristine seas. This vision calls for preserving in marine preserves huge parts, about 30% of the ocean's biodiversity by 2030. Now that is a big vision, actually. And our next speaker is going to talk about how they intend to do it using the geographic approach and scientific information to drive it. Enrique is actually an amazing person, as you're going to find out in just a moment. And you will come to know both his vision for doing this. He's actually the founder of Pristine Seas. How he's doing it, both technically and also working with different organizations around the world to accomplish this. When I first heard it, I didn't actually believe it would happen, but now I have the confidence that it is not only happening. Well, I'm taking his time, so I should just shut up and turn it over to Enrique. Maybe tell us your story, Enrique.
Well, thank you so much, Jack, for inviting me to speak today to all the Esri users around the world. And I have to admit that I don't know how to use your software, but in our team we have very smart people who do, like the thousands of people watching today. And I'm happy they do, because we've been able to use it to advance our plans on how much of the ocean we need to protect and which places are the top priorities. If I may, I'd like to share that story of why I'm speaking to all of you today. When I was a kid, growing up on the Mediterranean coast of Spain, I was fascinated by Jacques Cousteau's adventures on TV. You know, we had a black and white television set, and there were only 2 TV channels. And on Sunday evenings, the entire family was glued to the TV to watch the adventures of those divers. But I was born too late to become one of those divers. Instead, I studied marine biology in Barcelona and became an avid diver myself. I got a PhD in France, and shortly after, I became a professor at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in California. And there I was teaching and studying the impacts of humans, the impacts of fishing and climate change on ocean life. And my job was to publish these findings in scientific journals. And I did pretty well, publishing lots of papers with more and more data showing how fast marine life was dying because of us. And the more I published, the more I was rewarded by the university. I became a full professor. I made it at a relatively young age. But one day, looking out from the ivory tower, I realized that I had been running in a spinning wheel like a hamster, not taking the time to think why I was running so fast. I realized that all I was doing was writing the obituary of the ocean. I felt like the doctor who's telling you how you're going to die with excruciating detail, but not offering a cure. And that day, I decided to quit academia. I went back to the Mediterranean and took some time to think about my next steps. And in 2008, I decided to knock at National Geographic's door here in Washington, D.C. Now, why National Geographic? Because it had over a century of experience in exploration, research, storytelling, and education. And I thought we could combine those assets to help save vital places in the ocean before it's too late. And that's how Pristine Seas was born, a project to help save the last wild places in the ocean. And over the last 10 years, we've worked with local communities and governments to create 23 of the largest marine reserves in the world. Areas where fishing and other damaging activities are banned and where marine life thrives. And marine life does thrive within these no-take areas, within these marine reserves. I have seen it with my own eyes. Now, I'd love to share an example with you. In 1999, a little place called Cabo Pulmo in Baja California in Mexico was an underwater desert. The fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that they did something that no one expected. Instead of spending more time at sea trying to catch the few fish left, they stopped fishing completely. They asked the Mexican government to create a no-take area, a national park in the sea, a marine reserve covering 70 square kilometers of ocean. Not so large, but significant for Baja California. I returned 10 years later to the same place, and everything had changed. What had been a barren landscape was now a kaleidoscope of life and color. In just 10 years, it came back to pristine. Even the large predators came back. And you know who else is thriving? Those visionary fishermen. They are making far more money now from tourism inside the reserve, diving tourism, and fishing around it. And I've seen this miracle in many other places around the world. On average, the abundance of fish increases 6 times inside these reserves. The fish are larger, and we know that the large female fish produce a disproportionately larger number of eggs, which together with the spillover of adult fish helps to replenish the surrounding areas, then helping local fishermen. So if these marine reserves work so well, how much of the ocean is protected today? Well, today, only 7% of the ocean is in areas that have been designated or proposed as marine protected areas. But less than 3% of the ocean is fully protected from fishing and other damaging activities. Now, next question is, well, how much of the ocean we have to protect? Studies suggest a range of targets for protection, between 20% and 70% of the ocean, depending on what the goals are. But decision makers, politicians, need a bit more certainty. Also, soon the countries of the world are going to meet in China at the COP15 of the Biodiversity Convention to agree on how much space are we willing to give to the natural world, both on land and in the ocean. That's why in 2018, I put together a team of top scientists and economists to answer the question of which are the areas in the ocean that we must protect first, and how much of the ocean do we need to protect. And to answer these questions, we decided to focus on 3 main objectives: biodiversity, marine life, food, and carbon. On biodiversity, we wanted to know which areas contain unique and irreplaceable marine life that is threatened by human activities. And we made sure to distinguish human threats that are abatable by marine reserves, like fishing, from those that are not abatable bioreserve, like ocean warming, for example. So what we did was build a global database with pixels that are 50 by 50 kilometers in size, which is large for the land, but is relatively small for the ocean, and compile global databases on what species lives in each pixel, what is the risk of extinction, how unique they are on the tree of life, and many other variables. And we came up with this map, which ranks pixels from the top priority to the lowest priority. The top priority pixel is the one that, if fully protected, would deliver the biggest gains for biodiversity globally. The second top pixel is the one that delivers the second biggest gains, and so on and so forth. But if we think of biodiversity alone, that's not enough. That's not going to convince country leaders to protect much more of the ocean, to go from that 7% that we have now to much more. And why is that? Well, because there is a conflict with fishing. We hear often that we cannot protect more of the ocean because we have to catch more fish to feed more people. But that's a fallacy, because fishing catch has been declining since the mid-90s, even though the fishing effort has increased. And over 3/4 of the fish populations today are overfished, meaning we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. But as we saw in Cabo Pulmo, marine reserves can bring back marine life and help replenish the fish populations around them. So we developed a new model to identify which areas, if fully protected from fishing, would produce a spillover of fish that is greater than the foregone catch in these places. This is the map that ranks the pixels based on their benefits to fisheries. If we protected the right areas in the ocean, these areas could provide an extra 10 million tons of fish and invertebrates for us to eat. That's about 12% of the global catch today. And the third and final objective of our analysis was to figure out if more protection would also help to mitigate climate change. To do that, our team produced a new global map of carbon stocks in the ocean and found that the sediment on the seafloor, the top meter of the sediment, contains twice more carbon than all the soils of the land. But bottom trawling, which is the most destructive way to obtain food from the ocean, drags heavy and huge nets on the seafloor, resuspending much sediment and the carbon in it. And once it's exposed to the activity of microbes, some of that carbon turns to remineralizes to carbon dioxide, which is a powerful greenhouse gas that can stay 1,000 years in the atmosphere. So using satellite data from Global Fishing Watch allowed us to track individual bottom trawlers. And we estimated that every year, bottom trawling produces CO2 emissions into the ocean similar or larger than those from aviation globally, every single year. So if we protected the places where this bottom trawling is happening, and that trawling effort wasn't relocated elsewhere, we would avoid enormous carbon emissions. And that would help mitigate climate change. Now, if we think of each objective in isolations, there are trade-offs. Protecting the top areas for biodiversity could result in a loss of fishing catch, for example. To solve that problem, we developed a new framework to optimize multiple benefits, to optimize the 3 benefits. And what is clear, and you all know about this, that there is no silver bullet. There is no single map, the single solution. Picking which areas to protect depends on how much we value the different objectives. If we gain the same weight to each biodiversity, food and carbon, if we value them all equally, this is what we get. Protecting the right 45% of the ocean would maximize the benefits for biodiversity, food, and carbon. But we also found, unexpectedly, that if we gave biodiversity a value of 0, that means if society decides that biodiversity is something bad that we need to eradicate, then the minimum amount of ocean that we will protect would be 30%. So 30% of the ocean is the floor, the minimum area that we need to protect if we want to preserve marine life and all the benefits it provides to people. And our analysis get pretty wonky very quickly. And we require our amazing data scientist, Juan Mayorga, to conduct analysis for individual countries when we are asked by government officials. So discussing with you, Jack, you offered help from Esri. So everybody should know that Esri, that amazing team of engineers, have been developing a new web-based tool so that everyone, including government officials, can click on their waters and see what the priorities are for each objective separately, but also for all of them combined. And we are confident that this tool will help countries to inform further protection of their waters. And this year especially crucial for humanity, because like in 2015 we had the Paris Climate Agreement. This year we have this COP15 of the Biodiversity Convention in Kunming, China, where the world is going to sign a new agreement on nature. This is absolutely essential. We need that target agreed upon by all the countries of the world. But the most difficult part is going to be implementation, to bring this target into reality. And this is where geographic information is going to be absolutely key, because countries are already asking, well, yeah, sure, 30%, but do we need to protect 30%, more or less? Which are the areas? How much is it going to cost? What are the implications for fisheries? Now with this tool, we will be able to help countries not only be reassured that protection is going to benefit their fisheries and is going to help reduce carbon emissions, but also they will know that there is a tool that can help them implement that commitment. And this is something that we did not have before. This is why we are so excited to combine the expertise at National Geographic and our partners of exploration, research, economic analysis, and storytelling with Esri's capabilities, and create this tool, have this tool available so we can achieve the goal that the world needs, 30% of the ocean protected by 2030, so we can prevent the extinction of many species, the collapse of our life support system, and also we can help achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And for this, we will need the help from all of you, or many of you. You, Esri users, experts, amazing engineers in different countries around the world. There are databases that are proprietary. There are databases that you know of in your country that we didn't know about or we couldn't access for our global analysis. This expertise, those assets are going to be absolutely essential to help your countries implement that vision, that commitment, so we can preserve nature for the benefit of humanity and the rest of life on the planet. So thank you again, Jack, so much for giving me this platform today. And I look forward to continuing working with you and your team at Esri, and start working with our friends who are watching here in many countries around the world. Thank you.
It's an extraordinary vision, Enrique, and so I very much appreciate it. It's bringing so many thoughts that we've had in this conference together. Geoanalytics, providing the science base. Geovisualization, being able to communicate effectively. Collaboration, being able to collaborate with the members in various countries to get them to implement this science-driven vision so that it becomes a practical way to set up these huge reserves. It comes, of course, right out of National Geographic. Approach problem solving holistically. And your insight, your leadership is not just going to save the oceans and preserve these vast areas, but it also is an example, a kind of footprint for all of us to follow, saying, I have a vision, and you had it as a young person. First diving, then leaving the academy and doing something, and then doing all the work. I mean, all the hard work, all the necessary work that really makes this vision come alive. So it's a great pleasure for me to know you in my life, but also watch your footprints. They're examples for all of us to follow, Enrique. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Our next speaker in this plenary session is the Secretary of Natural Resources for the state of California. And he's going to share his vision for natural resource conservation, biodiversity conservation at a statewide level. It's the 3030 program applied to an entire state. So welcome, Secretary. And I want to let you know that there's a very interested audience in what you have to say about what you're doing here in the state of California.
Absolutely. Well, Jack, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be with you all here and now. I think for those of us who do this work, safeguarding the environment, stewarding our natural resources, This is a really unique moment. On the one hand, the challenges that we face as a planet or a nation or a state are daunting. Climate change in California now means catastrophic wildfire season bearing down on us, the second straight pernicious mega drought in a decade, and extreme heat across our state that we've never experienced. Climate impacts are here decades before scientists predicted. On the biodiversity front, we're seeing threats across our planet to this natural richness of life. Scientists call this the sixth major mass extinction event in the planet's history. And in California, one of 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world, we face significant stressors to maintain this biodiversity. And then likewise, California, like so many other places in the world, this challenge with the COVID pandemic laid bare just significant inequalities and inequities across our state. So we face some real challenges, Jack, but of course, what I'm really excited to talk to you about are the solutions. And the set of solutions that I'm excited to talk about today revolve around nature. And I saw a great headline in the Washington Post recently that said, "Nature will help save us if we give it the chance." And so in California, we're on this journey. And you mentioned the 30 by 30 goal to conserve 30% of California by 2030. That's a galvanizing target to step back and to really understand how we are managing our lands in the state. We're a big state, about 100 million acres or 40 million hectares. That includes built lands supporting a population of 40 million, working lands, our farms, our ranches, our commercial forests, and of course, natural areas that include some of the most iconic places on Earth, in my opinion, whether it's the Big Sur coast or Yosemite, so many places. And so right now we're focused on how do we harness that nature? How do we conserve and manage that nature to address our climate challenge, our biodiversity crisis, and growing inequity? And in California, we think actually nature is a key piece of the puzzle of solving climate, restoring, I should say, removing more carbon from the atmosphere through our trees and our soils, protecting communities and natural places from these climate impacts. Obviously, better management of nature will conserve our biodiversity and conserve our ecosystems and our habitats. And better management of our natural places will allow for more equitable public access into nature. So we're really excited about nature-based solutions. And of course, President Biden is leading on this topic in the federal government with his 30 by 30 goal. Jack, I'm so pleased that there are scores of countries around the world that have signed on to this high ambition coalition to protect 30% of their own lands and waters by 2030. And of course, this is all what scientists tell us is necessary. I Hold Half Earth by E.O. Wilson, who's suggesting, of ultimately protecting half of the Earth to save ourselves and our fellow species. So I'll just say I'm really excited to be doing this work. 30 by 30 has galvanized thousands of people across our state, experts, groups, to help us understand how we reach the 30 by 30. And I want to thank you at Esri, because you all stepped up and agreed to partner with us and bring your technical and technological sophistication to step back and to take a scientific and a data-driven approach to meeting our 30 by 30 goal. So I'm excited to talk about that with you here today.
Well, that's really exciting to me. You're making my heart patter here. E.O. Wilson has come to our conference, and many of our users know him quite well and his work. So the fact that you showed that book, everybody just fell in love with not only you, but also this ambition that you have, that's for sure. Well, what specifically do you think are the big challenges to making your vision come alive? I mean, you talked about data-driven initiatives. Our users are really anxious to know how they can participate and do the same sort of things, that you're doing with their leadership and with their people.
Well, I know a theme of your convening this year is really balancing our environmental priorities, our economic priorities, and our social priorities. And that's exactly what we're working to do in California. We certainly in our agency prioritize climate resilience and biodiversity and equitable access to the outdoors. But of course, Governor Newsom, our leader, is also prioritizing building more housing and addressing affordability and continuing to allow and support our economic growth through the economic use of land, whether it's in agriculture or in commercial forestry or fishing. So while we need to do more to conserve our nature, and that's really the driving force of 30 by 30, we have to balance this amidst a number of priorities. And that's really where Esri has come in with your geospatial approach to really understand how we utilize this 100 million acres in California to meet all of those priorities together.
Yeah, this approach that you said, a geospatial approach, I would call it a geographic approach, built on science and science-driven, that brings together all the different forces of economics and a healthy society and the sustainable resources of our environment. This approach, as we're describing it, integrates all the information, and it allows us to create holistic approaches and doing geodesign, designing a future which is more sustainable, but also deals with making all the trades at the same time. So you want to tell us a little bit more about the specifics of your program?
In California, everything we do on environmental management is driven by science. And we're so proud of the scientists that do their work in our agency and across our state government. Historically, a lot of that science wasn't able to actually utilize technology. And increasingly, our scientists are able to integrate technology. Great example, our talented team at Department of Fish and Wildlife used to maintain a biodiversity atlas that was, in essence, hard copy. This was a while back. And now has, of course, shifted to a living biodiversity atlas. This is happening across state government and will be aided by this California Nature platform that, of course, we're working with in partnership with your team, Jack.
It just reminds me, Secretary, that our federal agencies are doing the same thing. They're making their data available, which we are incorporating in our living atlas that we are using as a foundation for this. And they also have a vision for creating an atlas for conservation and stewardship, which is going to be made available across the entire country. This is working with DOI and USDA and NOAA and NASA. I mean, it's I wouldn't say they're inspired by you, but they're doing it coterminous with you. And as I look to the future, these things will increasingly be brought together with geospatial infrastructure for open sharing and new forms of collaboration.
Well, and it's so powerful to have that technology available to government and public sector organizations because the science, is so important, and that's actually driving management. So having publicly accessible, transparent technology that really allows for utilization of this science, I think, can be a real game changer.
Yeah, the big thing that inspires me about being with you is that technology is not enough. We can do all kinds of interesting tools and infrastructure building, but it really takes leadership. It requires also, chopping wood, hauling water kind of work like your people in California are doing, building the data, getting it digital, making it available, building the apps, connecting with people, working with communities, all those amazing things that your agency really exemplifies.
But likewise, Jack, I would say leadership is not enough because we could have the best of intentions, but given the complexities of conservation, science, these priorities, we need technology. So it's really the marriage of the two with some other factors in there that I think is where the magic can happen.
Are you going to show some of it to us?
Yeah.
Are you going to do the demos? Are you going to do the demos yourself? That's what I want to know.
No, like many things, I have somebody smarter who I'm going to introduce in a moment to actually do that. But I'll tell you that, I talk about our 30 by 30 work as a journey. Governor Newsom issued an executive order last October to establish the 30 by 30 target. And we were so gratified when President Biden, shortly after he came into office, announced a national 30 by 30 goal. And this year is spent really interacting with all of the leaders, academic institutions, scientists, community groups across our state to establish what will be a pathway to 30 by 30. And key to establishing that pathway over the next decade to conserve 30% of our land and coastal waters is that decision support system. And that's where Esri and the state are in a formal partnership to actually build out that platform or that system called CA Nature. And in order to drive this 30 by 30 process, the governor was really smart to recruit someone named Jennifer Norris, who comes into state government as our first deputy secretary at the Natural Resources Agency of Biodiversity and Habitat. And she brings with her 15 years of experience at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a expertise as a PhD biologist to help our efforts to support this pathway to 30 by 30. So Jen, I'm so glad to have you join us to talk about just what you've been up to with Esri in developing CA Nature.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot. As you have said, we are committed to conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. We want to do so in a manner that protects biodiversity, combats climate change, increases equitable access to nature, and safeguards our economic sustainability and food supply. There's never been a better use for GIS and technology to enable our efforts. It can help us provide a baseline assessment of the amount and location of lands and coastal waters currently conserved in California, establish a process to track and account for progress toward 30 by 30, and identify conservation opportunities to help California and its partners achieve our goals. The system we are building is called CA Nature. This will be a publicly accessible suite of interactive mapping and visualization tools. CA Nature will integrate information about biodiversity, climate change, and access, so we can view and analyze different features of the landscape in one place. It will allow us to identify places across California where we have the best opportunity to protect biodiversity, combat climate change, and achieve equity. We will use CA Nature to assess what percentage of California is already conserved and track our progress together. Our CA Nature project is comprised of 5 main pillars. Starting in the upper left, the foundation of it all is the GIS, or the environment for modeling and synthesizing the state's best science. Moving around to the right, next is the best available data. We're going to integrate and share content to advance understanding and support our analyses. Next is planning applications, which are a major component of what Esri is helping us build. This will include things like data exploration apps, focused planning apps for identifying conservation opportunities, and monitoring dashboards to track progress over time. Next is capacity building. Esri is helping us build the skills we'll need to effectively maintain, administer, and grow this system into the future. And finally, the heart of the entire effort, the outwardly facing web hub site, which serves as our communication vehicle through which all Californians can gain access to these resources and engage with our process. So let's take a look at the conceptual design of CA Nature. Starting on the left is the content or the source data that's feeding it all. We're taking multiple different sources of data, normally found in different locations, and bringing them together into one platform. Moving to the right, data is then leveraged for analytics and modeling, populating the open data portal, and streamed into applications for additional context. Next, focusing in the middle, the open data portal will house data organized around biodiversity, climate, and equity, as well as the databases that track protected areas. Moving to the top, this content will then feed a suite of applications for actively supporting conservation planning and tracking progress. Moving to the right, these tools will be made available to local governments and groups throughout the state to use in guiding their local decisions about which lands and waters to protect. And finally, as entities take planning and conservation action, their newly protected lands will be included in the protected areas database in the center, and again, summarized by dashboards at the top to track progress over time, thereby creating an integrated system for achieving 30 by 30. We are also now actively developing our first tier of applications related to data exploration. The sample app shown here is our early version of the CA Nature Biodiversity Explorer. It's being used to showcase the state's biodiversity data in new ways, such as with summary histograms that allow users to contextually view multiple variables and detect areas of desirable characteristics. We're especially excited to see our data displayed in new, innovative ways that really allow us to get the most out of what we know. In the months ahead, we'll be working to develop planning and prioritization apps that will synthesize this content and help to support conservation action. So that was a quick tour of CA Nature and our project and how we're working toward 30 by 30. I'll turn it back to you, Secretary Crowfoot.
So I'm very excited about this technology system, this geospatial system that Jen just shared more about, and also really excited to share that information on California Nature, this platform, and all of these 30 by 30 efforts is actually available on a website that we built, californianature.ca.gov. And that is really the home for all of our work in the state on nature-based solutions. So for those that want to learn more about that, about our work and about that data system that Jen just summarized, please do visit californianature.ca.gov.
What else do you want to say about this particular effort? What challenges do you face in terms of communities and getting involvement to make this thing really come alive?
Well, I would say 30 by 30 is galvanized by leaders stepping up and setting an ambitious goal, whether it's President Biden, other national leaders across the globe, or our Governor Newsom. But it won't be achieved by those leaders. Ultimately, collaboration across the board and across a lot of dimensions will be needed to actually meet our 30 by 30 target. That's collaboration between local governments and agencies, state government, federal government, tribal government, community-based organizations, environmental conservation nonprofits, hunting and fishing groups that focus on equity. So it really needs to be, the goal is driven from the top, but the solutions are driven from the grassroots. And I'm so gratified that CA Nature is actually going to be a public system that will not only help our decision-making, but will help decision-making at the granular community level, so that everyone will have access to the state-of-the-art data system in planning the future of their own communities or natural places that matter to a very specific region. I'll also say that this can't be a one-size-fits-all across the country or across the state. We're a big state, and we know that the challenges and opportunities are very different, whether it's on climate change, biodiversity, equity across our state. So again, this is a leadership-driven target and a broad technology system, but ultimately one that we think gets utilized across regions. And I guess the last point I'd make is that we should have optimism. The challenges have never been greater to our environment, our planet, even our way of life. I mean, at this very moment, wildfires rage across California, tens of thousands of acres with thousands of people evacuated. Our drought means salmon are hanging on this season in some of our rivers, and that some communities are running out of water. So clearly, the challenges are almost unprecedented. But I will say this is a moment in time where we have leadership across the world, across the country, I would say in our state, to meet the challenge. And I think this 30 by 30 is a galvanizing target, really like none other on environmental conservation. And I'm hopeful that in coming months, in coming years, we'll demonstrate real progress to restoring nature and conserving nature. And I think what I've seen anyways is, again, when you give nature half a chance, it's resilient. We're seeing California condor come back in California. Governor Newsom and I were just up with the Yurok tribe in far northern California, who are actively involved in restoring condor into their ancestral lands that have been gone for 100 years. We've seen sea otters come back on our mid-coast. We're seeing beavers repopulate our rivers. this can happen, and it will happen if we actually marry the political will with the scientific understanding and the technology tools. So I have to say, I'm really, really excited with all that we've done, but will do together moving forward.
I'm absolutely thrilled, Secretary. This has been a really great conversation. What I get from listening to you is, one, leadership is very important. Top down, your relationship with the governor, seeing it, driving it, but also your interpretation of bottom up, getting communities involved, getting them engaged. We heard from an earlier speaker from the Kellogg Foundation, and they quoted Mr. Kellogg. He said, "I learn much more by asking questions than telling people what I know." And that really resonates with me, and you just remind me of him in so many ways. He also said that through cooperative planning and intelligent study and group action, then communities can really make a change. And so I'm thrilled about that dimension of both your and the governor's personality, but also this entire initiative. The other thing about opening up and sharing the knowledge, both as a web service so people can do it themselves, but also opening the data, collaborating with our federal agencies like USGS, Department of Interior, USDA, NOAA, NASA, all of these organizations. They're not only, by the way, giving their data to this effort by way of the Living Atlas, and it's getting integrated in, but also we're able to contribute back to things like the protected area database for a kind of national strategy. And then finally, by the way, just sharing your model. And some of it comes through your personality, but also your staff, the idea that you're willing to share as a model. You sometimes said California first, but well, I just say California is definitely participating and putting footprints down that we can all copy very much. So listen, I'm thrilled that you were able to share this, and I know our users around the world look at California. It's going to be opening up again, and like you, I have a very positive spirit about that we can turn this around. I mean, it's what human beings are really all about. So thank you, Secretary. Any final words that you want to share?
I would just say, let's continue to learn from each other. Best part of my job is I'm learning every day. And at the last international conference I went to before the pandemic, I learned so much actually about our coastal resource management. For example, from nations in the South Pacific that have been exercising environmental conservation for thousands of years and built in that indigenous knowledge. So I think with your network across the world of Esri users, we have so much to learn from each other. And I think if this 30 by 30 movement grows as I hope and I expect it to, I'm really excited to continue to work with you to utilize technology, to take wisdom, to take learning from different places, to not only improve our efforts in California, but really across the world. So I would just say Godspeed.
Godspeed, yes. Building a kind of infrastructure, an intelligent infrastructure that can create a more sustainable world. This is the big challenge that we're all thinking about right now. And thank you for your inspiration. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jack. Good luck.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the conclusion of 4 amazing speakers. We heard, of course, from a person walking around the world, Paul Salopek, who's sharing his experience bottom up of what he sees with indigenous people around the world and the effects of climate change. And we moved on to listen to one of my new best friends. This is Lejeune Montgomery Teberon, who is working with Kellogg Foundation on issues of racial equity and seeing it through the geographic lens, and working with communities and the UN to make us a better world in that regard as well. And then, of course, through Enrique Sala, who's amazing work, and I know that the Secretary enjoys, like I do, oceans and ocean conservation and marine conservation. His work, I think, promises to really get it together at the ocean level. And finally, concluding with Secretary Crowfoot, a vision and taking the vision to practice, which is what we all have to do. Move like the speed of light, because it's late in the day, but it's not dark yet. That's your big message, Secretary. And so thank you. Thank all of you. and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.